My book, Holding to and Letting Go.
That's the way I kind of look at things.
My next book that I published is The Passing of the Old and the New.
Okay.
Working on another.
Excellent. Okay.
The problem with those things is they just never die. You know, that thing runs as well today. 30 years of it.
That's pretty good.
Holding to and Letting Go from one of my books. And it's very interesting because you can turn it around and you have a picture on that side too. And that's the final port. You can take these pictures out and you just have this. And Sarah Collier does this type of work.
Good afternoon. Help me in welcoming our guest from Houston, Texas, Jason French. He is Director, Government and Public Affairs for Cheniere Energy. He is responsible for government relations, public affairs, and community outreach at the state and local levels. As Cheniere works to develop the LNG export facilities in Louisiana and Texas. Mr. French joined Cheniere Energy in November 2011. Prior to joining Cheniere, he was Director of Government and Public Affairs for BP America, where he held several key public affairs roles during the Deepwater Horizon spill, response including Chief PIF Liaison at the Incident Command Center and External Affairs, led in Grand Isle, Louisiana. Before working for BP, Mr. French worked for CSX Transportation, a major railroad serving in the eastern U.S. He is a native of Louisville, Kentucky, and is a 2000 graduate of the University of Louisville. He currently resides in Houston, Texas, with his wife, Andrea.
Thank you for the introduction, Sandy. Thank you, Carol, and everyone here for inviting me to be with you today. I realize I'm going to have to update the bio that the company keeps on me because not only am I the husband of Andrea, but we also have a 7-month-old. So I'm a little 7-month-old Jackson, so I've got to add that to the bio as well. Let me first begin with just a very brief apology. I know some of you were counting on hearing me regale you with tales of the behind-the-scenes stories of the BP spill. I've told to Sandy and Carol that I will come back and do that in the future. I do that speech sometimes, but this is actually my day job, and I had told my bosses I had a great group I was talking to in Shrevary about this important LNG project, so I wanted to keep that the subject of today, but I'll be happy to come back and tell you some of those stories. Knowing who I did work for, I'll tell you I've had some interesting public speaking engagements, so I want this to be a freewheeling affair. If you have questions or if you disagree with me, feel free to interrupt. If you don't threaten me or throw anything at me, this will not be my worst speaking engagement. So having switched the presentation topic on you, my challenge today is simple. I'm going to try to make an industrial project that's over 200 miles away from where we sit interesting to you this afternoon. So I'll do my best. I'll tell you the story that I'm going to tell you today. It is an interesting story, and of the topics I could have talked to you about, this is the one that really has the most bearing on this region's future. I'll start off by telling you a little bit about the company, Cheniere Energy. Our story really kind of mirrors the story of America's energy over the last 10, 20 years. We actually began, and I didn't know this when I took the job, but we began as an offshore drilling company. I was trying to get away from that, but we were actually developing gas plays off of in the shallow waters of the coast of Louisiana in the late 90s. For a company of small resources, both capital and human resources, our board decided that probably wasn't the best business for us to be in. So around 2000, we started looking at where gas markets stood. And you know, it seems like a punchline to say it today, but the U.S. was really facing at that time, or so we thought, a natural gas shortage. So what we decided to do was look at whether there was a possibility to import in the form of liquefied natural gas into places like Louisiana and Texas. I tell you this to remind you we weren't the only ones who were wrong. In 2004, Alan Greenspan, then the chair of the Federal Reserve, actually told the committee of Congress that one of the biggest challenges facing the U.S. economy was the shortage of natural gas. Yeah, that does bring laughter sitting here in the middle of the Haynesville ship. So we built in Cameron Parish, Louisiana, on the coast of Cameron Parish, Louisiana, a $1.6 billion facility to import natural gas. And we had the good fortune of opening that facility in 2008, right about the time that the Haynesville Shale and all these number of shale plays across the country were really starting to come online. We really were starting to realize the abundant supply of natural gas that we have. Well, much to the credit of our management and our board, and really out of necessity, it was a situation of adapt or die. And our board decided to go 180 degrees the other way. With this abundant supply of natural gas, is there an opportunity to actually export it and send it to other markets that need natural gas? And that brings us to what I'm going to talk to you about today. We are now developing a liquefied natural gas facility at the same site in Cameron Parish, Louisiana, that will have some bearing on this region and the entire country. Before I go any farther, and I know that in this area there are probably a lot of you are very familiar with the oil and gas industry, but I do want, well, I would hit the wrong slide. There we go. I didn't practice to make sure I hit the right thing. So I know a lot of you are probably familiar with the industry, and I will, so I don't need to insult your intelligence, but I'd like to establish what LNG is. There's so many acronyms in this business. NGLs, which are natural gas liquids, CNG, compressed natural gas, or what I'm talking about, liquefied natural gas. And it's very simple. Liquefied natural gas is the same natural gas that comes into your home, that you use on your stove or your hot water heater or your furnace. We actually take that gas and bring it in massive quantities, actually a 42-inch pipe that will bring it into our facility. And we take it and cool it, cryogenically cool it. It comes into the pipeline about 60 degrees. We take it to negative 260 degrees. And what that does is it condenses the size ratio from 600 to 1, making it safer and easier to store and transport. So those are the main things. And I'll tell you, I also apologize for slide presentations. I hate speaking from slide presentations, so you don't have to read everything that's up on the slides. I'll be quite honest with you, a lot of the times it's just a cheat sheet for me to remember to make sure I'm telling you the right things to do. This is the one graph I included. I could have included it, or there are a couple others, but to show you the natural gas reserves. It wasn't that long ago that the U.S. was closer to the middle of this chart. We now have the largest reserves, and we are the largest producer of natural gas in the entire world. That's amazing when you consider 2004, what Alan Greenspan was saying to Congress, and we were opening an import facility in 2008, how quickly the paradigm has shifted, and we have become a major, in fact, the largest producer of natural gas. This number is actually a bit dated. There are some estimates that show it higher, but we have over 2.6 quadrillion cubic feet of natural gas in the U.S. When you hear people talk about 100 and 125-year supply of natural gas, this is what they're talking about. This is a somewhat complicated slide, but basically here's what it shows. That over the next 20 years, we as a country are going to be able to produce significantly more gas than we can use. Now, there is a shift from coal to natural gas and power generation, and there are folks who are trying to use natural gas in transportation, and the infrastructure is trying to be built for that. The gray area that you see running through the middle of this graph shows the low end and the high end. If everything stayed the same, our consumption of natural gas would be at the bottom of the gray. If we were to pass a carbon tax at the federal level, if we were to have heavy incentives to get transportation infrastructure in place, then our use of natural gas in this country would be at the top end of the gray. The blue that's over that is how much natural gas we can produce in this country. This is an issue, and we'll talk about it in a moment, some of the policy issues around LNG exports. But the fact is we can produce more gas than we can use. And we need to create a market for that gas if that gas is going to be produced in areas like the Haynesville Shale. This shows where the demand is going to be. You can see Europe and Asia are where we anticipate significant demand for natural gas over the next 20 years. In fact, 28 billion cubic feet of natural gas needs to come online, being exported into these countries, into these regions, over the next 20 years. Nearly one of the facilities that we're building in Louisiana, one of those needs to be built each year to meet the demand. It sounds like a lot, but again, as we talk about the policy debate, the fact is there are a lot of, I tell people who ask us about competition, there are a number of companies who are building these facilities, and I say, our competition is not Sempra. It's not the other companies that are building. It's not a Coke-Pepsi type competition. Our competition is with Australia and some of the African nations that are also starting to develop their natural gas resources and have the potential to meet this demand. And that's why our window to build these facilities is somewhat finite and will close at some point. But the demand around the world is there. This is one of those, don't worry about trying to read every number on this chart. This simply makes the business case for why customers in Asia, why customers in Europe want to buy gas from the Haynesville Shale, want to buy gas from the U.S. Gulf Coast. And the prices have gone down a bit. This was in May. We're now down. Gas is about I actually haven't looked at it last week or so, but $3.50, $3.60 per million BTU in the United States. In Europe, they're paying $11. In Asia, they're paying $16 to $17 for gas. You've seen what happened in Japan with the nuclear disaster at Fukushima. They're now turning to natural gas for their power needs. So there's a real thirst for this gas. And with the prices that we have in the U.S., it's very attractive. Even with shipping and the liquefaction charges that we add on to actually cool and liquefy the gas, it's still very economical for the customers around the world, and they're very anxious to buy gas here. This is the exciting part for me. This is the actual facility we're building. What you see in blue is what we actually have on the ground today. That's the $1.6 billion facility. Now, I told you that we got things wrong when we were planning out to import natural gas. When we get things wrong, we go big. What you see there in the blue is the largest facility of its kind in the world. So we didn't just build a facility, we built the biggest facility. What you see in the orange to the right are trains 1 through 4. Trains are simply LNG production units, that's what we call them for whatever reason. And that's under construction today. What you see in the orange represents a $12 billion investment in Louisiana. Over to the far left, we're so excited about this project, so confident in this project, we've already announced and have started to permit an expansion of it before construction is even complete. This will make it by far the largest LNG export facility in the U.S. when it's complete. And just the area in the orange, when that's complete in 2017, Cheniere Energy, it's hard to believe for a company that only has about 300 employees, we will be the largest purchaser of natural gas in the entire United States when this facility opens. So this is a major development for any body in any region that natural gas is important to, as it is to this area. So this will be a very large facility. Those tanks that you see, this doesn't really give you an idea of size, but to give you some sense of perspective, each one of those tanks holds enough natural gas to power the entire state of Louisiana for a day. So there's quite a bit of energy that will be being produced and stored in this facility. Which leads me to this, to give you an idea. At the very bottom left-hand corner is a pickup truck, and this is one of the production units. What you're looking at, the main thing you're looking at are the cooling fans. There are 200 cooling fans for each production unit, and each one of those cooling fans is over 15 feet wide. So this is a big construction facility. The cooling fans are about 5 stories in the air. If any of you have a chance to drive down Highway 82 in Cameron Parish, and I would imagine most of you won't, but if you did, you'll get to see what a $12 billion construction project looks like. And it is pretty breathtaking to see, to be quite honest with you. The pipes that lead into the compressors for the natural gas, to give you an idea, I would be able to ride, I'm 6'4", and I would be able to ride a 10-speed bike through the piping that leads into the compressors. This is a big, big operation. Each one of these trains is powered by 6 GE LM2500 turbines, which is just a fancy name for 747 jet engine. So each one's powered by 6 747 jet engines. So this is a big operation that we're in. And again, the pictures don't quite do it justice, but this is the only project in the country that's under construction too. There have been a number of LNG projects announced, but this is the only one that's actually under construction. And that's one of the latest to try to take in the whole site. The steel, again, 5 stories in the air. Also, an interesting fact on construction, you all know, building in southern Louisiana, and the concern for hurricanes, and it's particularly in Cameron Parish, somewhat swampy land. What we had to do to build this facility, we've driven 13,000 pilings into the ground. These are 18-inch concrete pilings that have to go 90 feet into the ground to hit bedrock. We've driven 13,000 so far. When we're done, we will have driven 60,000 of those pilings. If you put them end to end, it would reach from the coast of Louisiana to Chicago. So this is a big construction site down there. For the benefits for the folks locally are probably fairly obvious. From an employment standpoint, we're going to add 250 jobs at Cheniere. We are also going to add 170, 180 permanent contractor jobs to the site. So over 400 jobs will be added to the site. We currently employ only about 70 at at the site. The construction period for what's permitted now, those first 4 trains, is going to go through 2017. With the additional trains, we anticipate construction going to 2019 or 2020. It's not permanent construction, but it's very close when you start talking about 7- and 8-year construction periods. At peak construction, we will have 4,500 people on the site. In Cameron Parish, for those of you who are familiar with it, there are only 6,800 residents in all of Cameron Parish. So peak construction will nearly double the population of the entire parish. An important point, and this one is particular to this region. Again, there's a lot of debate about LNG exports, but one of the things that you need to know, for every 2 billion cubic feet of demand that's added to the system, guaranteed demand, and that's what we're going to be doing. With the first 4 trains, we will be able to export 2.2 billion cubic feet of gas per day from the United States. With that, for every 2 billion cubic feet of demand, you support 50,000 full-time jobs in the exploration and production sectors. So that is a very important secondary benefit of these type projects. Now this is just one project. When we do trains 5 and 6, we'll be at 3.5 BCF at least. We're doing a project in Corpus Christi as well, which will be an additional 2 BCF. You start talking about 5.5 BCF, you're talking about over 100,000 jobs on drilling rigs, on service companies that support the drilling rigs. And that's particularly important to producing regions like this, and to royalty owners, and anybody who has a stake in a producing region such as the Haynesville Shale. Local taxes aren't as important to you folks, but I'll tell you that this is, I think, one of the most impressive numbers. One of the most impressive numbers. Our one facility, trains 1 through 4, will reduce the U.S. trade deficit by $7 billion. The U.S. trade deficit with the rest of the world is about $500 billion, give or take a few billion each year. This one facility by this one company will reduce the U.S. trade deficit by $7 billion. When you put all of our projects onto it, you're talking $15 to $20 billion with this small company in Houston. So, a bit on the actual policy. This is probably the most important to those of you in the audience. This is what's most important to the region. Study after study has shown that the pricing impact of LNG exports, the domestic prices over 20 years, the price impact will be small, roughly 10%. But what those studies have also shown is by creating demand for gas that's produced here, what you're going to do is soften that curve that leads to the boom and bust cycle. Something that I know this area is very familiar with. When gas was at $13, $14 here in the U.S., everybody and their brother had a drilling company, and they all wanted to be right here. The drilling count in the Haynesville Shale at peak was about 138. This is according to Louisiana Oil and Gas Association. Today it's 28. One of the largest producers here, Chesapeake, just a couple years ago, had 38 rigs drilling in this area. Today they have 2. And that's because when prices are here, everybody wants to drill. When they fall to where they were last April, under $2, you can't give the gas away. And that really is hard on the communities where the gas is located. From the folks in the E&P sector, from the royalty owners, it is very difficult to plan as a community long term when you're going through that constant boom and bust cycle. So when prices are low, they lay down the rigs, and then prices start to come back up. What we believe, and what the studies have shown, is that exports will soften that curve. The highs won't be as high, the lows won't be as low, but producers and communities will be able to plan for the long term. I'm not going to go through all of these in the interest of time. I want to leave some time for questions for that. A couple that I did want to touch on, obviously the U.S. balance of trade, which I've already mentioned. And also advancing our national security interests. Our allies in Asia and Europe, oftentimes, let's take Eastern Europe for example, they're subject to the whims of Vladimir Putin in Russia. The state-owned gas company in Russia very often uses their natural gas supplies, which these nations depend on, as to be diplomatic, we'll call them a diplomatic bargaining tool, to bend some of those nations to the will of folks who they may not want to bend to their will. By the U.S. becoming a major producer, by exporting our natural gas to our allies around the world, we believe it strengthens our allies, it strengthens our position from a geopolitical perspective. So I wanted to mention that as well. Don't read through this one at all. Don't even look at this. This is the slide to remind me to talk to you about the regulatory process we have to go through. To build a facility like this, we have to get over 40 different federal and state permits. There's a reason why our project in Louisiana is the only project in the entire country that's under construction. As you hear debate about this at the federal level, it's usually about the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy has to give us a license to export natural gas. And so far, despite 20 applications, only 4 have been approved. 3 of those have been approved in the last 2 months. Before that, ours was approved 2 years before that. So the federal government has very much slowed the process to get these projects to construction. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is the other major agency. They're the umbrella agency, and I don't want to go too far into the weeds on all the permitting, but they're the umbrella agency that oversees really all the other permitting. They look at the project from an environmental, from a community impact standpoint, and they actually give you the authority to build and operate the project. We are the only project in the entire country to receive that approval as well. All of the other projects, and only 5 have actually been applied to fund. So the important thing to know, it may interest you or may not, but when you hit the send on that FERC application, you've spent about $100 million in just before you can even apply to FERC, which is why only 5 projects have gotten that far. This LNG exports create major opportunities for the U.S., economically, geopolitically, as I've said. But right now, the X factor, the uncertain factor is what happens at the level of the federal government, whether these projects are going to be allowed to be built. Before I open it to questions, I also want to mention, for any of you who have an interest in this issue, who believe LNG exports should be going forward, we as a company are starting to spearhead a coalition effort. We're trying to put together a third-party coalition effort that's going to start in the States. These things usually start in Washington, D.C., and we'd like it to start in Louisiana, where we have really started. So we're going to start in Louisiana and Texas, putting together groups of state associations, folks from the business community who are supportive of this, who see the economic opportunity that LNG exports create, to ask them to join us and be a voice to members of Congress, to those regulators in Washington, D.C. who are slowing some of the projects down. We'd love to have your help. So if any of you are interested in being part of that effort, we're going to announce it next month. Please see me afterwards, and I can give you some information on that as well. With that, I think I've touched on most of the topics I wanted to touch on. If anybody has any questions.
Where in the world will you feed and house 4,500
So that is a challenge. Because this project's located in Louisiana, we're doing everything we can to ensure that the economic benefits of this project accrue to Louisiana. But again, if you're familiar with Cameron Parish, I think there are about, the census shows that there are about 20 or 30 housing units available. And that was an overestimation, I'll tell you that. The construction piece is being managed by Bechtel. So they are looking at a number of solutions. We're only at about 600 right now. So people are, as we did on the original project, campers, RVs, a lot of the landowners down there open RV parks. And that provides quick construction housing. One of the things that we're trying to do, because of just the permanent workers who are coming into the area, there's no housing for them. We've actually contracted with a group called the Windrock Foundation. We've provided a $500,000 grant to start developing housing in the area. So we're working with developers to put an RFQ out. It's interesting to see a gas company actually taking an active role in developing housing developments in the parish. But we're doing that, and have done a number of things to try to bring. There's not a place to buy. Well, there are now. There are two stores that have opened around us. But when we first started down there was no place to buy bread. You couldn't get gas. If you left Cameron before you got to Texas, you better have a quarter tank of gas. You're going to be in trouble. So we're doing everything we can to encourage development for the long haul and working with Bechtel to ensure that we minimize the impact on the community on the short-term housing issues. But it is going to be a challenge. And a lot of those folks will end up staying in the Port Arthur area just because that's where the infrastructure is right now.
Let's make an assumption that you're finished with your project and at the wellhead gas is $3 a thousand. When it comes out the other end and is handed over to a supplier in Europe, what's your estimate of what the cost is going to be?
Well, and I probably should have walked through that chart a little bit more. So there are several costs that are added in. Let's say, taking your price of $3 gas. We charge, and this is how, I'll explain to you real quickly how we make our money. We charge a flat fee for the volumes that the customer agrees to take. $3 per million BTU. Now, whether they take that gas or not, they've all signed 20-year contracts. Those first 4 trains, every drop of gas that comes out of there has already been sold for the next 20 years. That's how much demand there is for U.S. natural gas. So $3, which is the price of the gas, we tack on our $3, which is where we make our money. Depending on where it's going, there's a shipping cost. For Europe, it could be $1 to $1.50. For Asia, it would be $3. So let's be consistent and say we're going to Asia. $3 for the cost of gas, $3 to liquefy, $3 to transport, and under $1 to up to $1 to regasify, turn it back into a gas at the other end. So with that estimate, you're at $10, which is still $6 to $7 cheaper than what they're paying in Asia now. Yes. Cheniere is, what we found is these global customers who are used to buying LNG in other countries, they don't want to deal with domestic politics. They don't want to deal, they want to pull up, have their ship loaded. So what we've done in our contracts is we go to the marketplace, buy the gas at Henry Hub prices. We'll buy it at Henry Hub prices. We tack on 15% because we lose 15% in the process. That's not a profit center for us. That's just lost the boil off and the use of the process, yes. So we will be purchasing the gas, liquefying it, and then selling it to the customer as we load it onto the ship.
All this sounds real good, but there's no place for us to use it. Why don't y'all take some of your production money, plant money, and build some stations? I mean, then you're going to see everybody start paying.
No, you're right. One of the issue around transportation, as you know, is that it's really a chicken or egg question. You don't want to buy, you or I don't want to buy a car until the stations are there, but the companies don't want to invest in the stations until the cars are there. There are a number of companies, Chesapeake, Devon, Apache, that are making significant investments in infrastructure. To be quite honest with you, this is the business that we're in, is large-scale purchasing and liquefying of the natural gas. Now, we have recently announced a joint venture with a startup in Houston to look at, it'll be for transportation, but it'll be primarily for ships. We're looking at maritime transportation for the crew boats that go offshore, that type of thing, converting that element of transportation using LNG. So there are certainly opportunities in compressed and liquefied natural gas to use it in transportation. A number of companies are doing it. We are not, that's just simply not the business we are in right now. We're looking at the large-scale liquefaction projects.
A question regarding what would keep Chesapeake and some of these other companies from going to Asia to do the fracking that they've done here? Is it geologically, is it not any gas there, or is it what would prohibit them from going over and creating the same problem? Not really a problem, but the fact is, they go over there and create a whole bunch of gas in those areas.
It's a great question. The fact is there are shale plays all over the world. There are shale plays in China. There are shale plays in Europe. There are a number of reasons why we believe, and why the customers who've been willing to sign 20-year contracts believe that those supplies aren't going to come on quickly. One of the most basic is infrastructure. Countries like China simply don't have the pipeline infrastructure to get the gas to market, even if they could. A number of the European countries are pushing back, like France, for example, on fracking. They've prohibited fracking within their boundaries, which makes those shale plays, they can't reach them now, they can't frack. Some of the wells in, I think it's Poland, where some drilling has been done, the shale plays have not been as productive as they were on paper. Theoretically, they were going to be more productive. So the shale is out there, but the infrastructure doesn't exist for those to become major sources of energy anytime in the near future. 20, 25 years from now, they likely will start to develop. But the customers who are buying from us at this point feel very confident that the U.S. is the place to be buying right now. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, on the tankers that you use, the capacity of them, equating it to MCF, how much MCF or liquefied gas have you put?
So the typical ship, it's a range of ships. The typical ship that we'll call on the Sabine Pass facility will be in the 170,000 cubic meters. We use so many different conversions, but basically one of those tanks, which is a 3 billion cubic feet a day equivalent. It's liquefied, so it's not gas, but if it was gas, in its gaseous form, it would be 3 billion cubic feet a day. We can load basically one of those tanks per ship. So the ships are big. Very good question. And down in Corpus Christi, I get this question a lot because we're building much closer to residential areas than we are in Louisiana. LNG in its liquefied form, obviously because it doesn't have oxygen in it, can't burn. But you're right, the gas burns. That's why we're in this business. One of the points that is often made is that it's the equivalent of a nuclear. There's as much energy on one of these ships as an atomic or nuclear explosion. There's so many Hiroshimas. Interesting fact, the average coal train has more energy than 4 Hiroshima atomic bombs. But it's all in how that energy is released. The fact is natural gas will burn, but it's not explosive in an unconfined environment. And it's lighter than air. So if there were to ever be a breach of a ship, or if there was to be a breach of a tank, a modern tank, and interesting to note, there's never been a breach of a modern ship or a modern tank. But if there were, natural gas is lighter than air. So the idea that it would go out and envelop neighborhoods and create an explosion is just simply not the case. What gas will do, within a very narrow window, 5 to 15% natural gas and air, it will burn. Once it hits an ignition source, it will burn back to the source of the leak, but it will not explode. Natural gas only explodes when it's pressurized or in a confined environment. But it does not, in that type of situation, if a tanker were to be hit or a tank, it would not explode. It will burn. It would be, what I always say is I wouldn't want to be standing on the deck of one of those boats. But the boat would not provide or present a danger to the surrounding communities, just because of the simple qualities of natural gas. It acts like a thermos. Even on the ships, it cools itself. It's so cold it cools itself. And there's a boil-off effect where it's starting to gasify at the top, and then we have reliquefiers on the ship that takes that gas that's boiling off and reliquefies it. But there's not actually a cooling element to keep these cool. When you're at negative 260 degrees, it cools itself with limited oil. The LNG is stored at just above atmospheric pressure. So it's not under pressure. So this is not compressed. All right, it's 12:59.